He thought he was saving her. He thought he was honoring his best friend's memory. But the truth was darker than he could ever imagine. This is the story of a man who married his best friend's widow and discovered too late that the past is never truly buried. This is a story that quickly unravels into a chilling tale of betrayal, secrets, and a revelation so devastating. It will leave you questioning everything about love, loyalty, and trust. It began with rain. Thick, heavy drops falling on black umbrellas, masking the tears of those who gathered to say goodbye. Daniel Miller, loyal friend, devoted husband, dead far too soon. Black umbrellas dotted the cemetery like dark flowers, their edges dripping with water. The mourners huddled close together, shoulders pressed tight. But even within that crowded sea of grief, Michael Carter felt utterly alone. Daniel hadn't just been his friend. He had been his brother in all but blood. They had grown up together, laughed together, fought side by side through life's challenges. And now Daniel was gone, lowered into the earth far too soon, his coffin swallowed by mud and rain. Michael's hands shook around the umbrella handle. He couldn't decide if it was the cold or the unbearable truth pressing down on his chest. He had always believed Daniel was invincible, untouchable, the kind of man who seemed destined to live forever. But destiny, Michael was learning, was cruelly indifferent. And then, his gaze shifted. Claire. She stood at the front, draped in black, her veil clinging to her face with rain. She did not cry, not in the way others did. No sobs tore from her throat. No trembling shoulders gave her grief away. Instead, she stood stiffly, almost like a statue carved from grief itself. Her hands clenched so tightly together, Michael worried her knuckles would split. Something about her silence chilled him more than the rain ever could. As the priest spoke words of farewell, Michael's mind drifted. He remembered nights with Daniel, their laughter spilling through cheap beer and bad jokes. He remembered how Daniel's eyes had always lit up when Claire entered the room, how he'd once whispered to Michael, "She's it, Mike. She's my forever." And now forever lay 6 feet under the ground. As the crowd dispersed, Michael stayed. He couldn't leave her. Not like this. "Claire, you're not alone," he whispered, touching her shoulder gently. Her eyes met his, bloodshot but sharp, filled with something he couldn't name. "Michael," she said, voice shaking, "you don't know everything. There are things about Daniel, things I can't say here." Her words cut through the rain. A secret. A warning. But then she looked away, lowering her veil as if burying the words with her husband's coffin. Before he could ask, before he could even process the chill running through him, she let go, stepping back. The look in her eyes was not just grief. It was fear. Michael wanted to ask. He wanted to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat, drowned by the rain and the silence between them. He thought he was honoring Daniel's memory when he vowed to protect Claire. He thought he was doing the right thing. But even in that moment, deep in the marrow of his bones, he sensed something. A shadow of sorts. And shadows, once noticed, are impossible to ignore. He had no idea. That promise would become the chain dragging him into a nightmare. Days blurred into weeks. Michael threw himself into work, into distractions, into anything that would stop him from picturing Daniel's coffin disappearing into the mud. But no matter what he did, He found his thoughts drifting back to Claire. Months passed. Grief softened, though never fully faded. Then came the visits. Michael began to visit Claire. At first, it was for practical reasons. Fixing a leaky faucet, helping with bills, carrying groceries. But as time passed, it became more than that. He stayed to talk, to listen, to sit in silence when silence was all she had. And slowly, he began to notice things. The way her eyes lingered too long on Daniel's old chair, as though expecting him to walk in and sit down. The way she sometimes seemed to drift into thoughts so deep and dark that Michael feared she might never climb back out. And then there were the words she had whispered at the grave. There are things about Daniel, things you could never understand. What had she meant? As weeks turned to months, Michael and Claire leaned on each other more. Grief had woven their lives together like frayed threads bound by the same wound. Neighbors whispered, some disapproving, others sympathetic. But Michael ignored them. And then, one quiet evening, Claire looked at him with eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and longing. "Michael," she whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore." It was not the confession of love. It was the plea of someone drowning, reaching for anything that might keep her above water. And Michael, heart heavy with guilt but aching with need, reached back. That night, they made love over and over, only stopping at dawn. What began as comfort turned into something deeper, and before long, whispers of scandal grew louder. One day, Michael decided to put an end to the whispers, and so he proposed to Claire. Soon, whispers of scandal turned into wedding bells. On the day they stood together at the altar, Michael told himself this was right. This was what Daniel would have wanted. He was honoring his friend's memory, giving Claire the safety and companionship she deserved. But when he looked into her eyes as they exchanged vows, he saw something he could not name. A glimmer of fear, a shadow of secrets unsaid. And on their wedding night, long after the guests had left and the house had grown still, Michael reached for her hand in the dark. She stirred in her sleep, her lips parting. "Daniel," she whispered. Michael froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. It was not his name she called in the night. It was his best friend's. And in that moment, lying beside the woman he thought he had saved, Michael realized something chilling. Marriage did not silence the past. It invited it in. The weeks after the wedding blurred into a haze of adjustments. Michael had never expected marriage to Claire to feel like this. Not wrong, but not quite right either. It was like moving into a house where every corner still smelled faintly of another man's cologne. Claire carried Daniel in every word, every silence, every flicker of her eyes when his name slipped into conversation. She never spoke of him directly, but he was there, between them. A ghost who refused to leave. At night, Michael lay awake beside her. Sometimes she reached for him, clutching his shirt as though she were afraid he might disappear. Other nights she rolled away, her body curling inward, lips whispering names that made his heart ache. He told himself this was grief. This was normal. That love built out of loss would take time to grow. But deep inside, a gnawing unease began to fester. One morning, weeks into their marriage, Michael entered the kitchen to find Claire staring at a letter on the counter. When she saw him, she tried to sweep it aside, but not before he glimpsed the handwriting on the envelope. Daniel's handwriting. "Claire, what is that?" She froze, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the envelope flat. "Just something I found in his things," she murmured. "I like to read them sometimes. It helps me feel close to him." Michael nodded, forcing a smile. But when she left the room, his chest tightened. Daniel had been dead for over a year. And yet the ink on the paper looked fresh. Too fresh. Their days became a rhythm of quiet routines. Breakfast together, Claire staring out the window with distant eyes. Michael heading to work, returning to find her sitting in the dark, the television flickering without sound. One evening, he returned to a locked study door. He knocked, gently at first, then harder. "Claire? Are you in there?" There was a long pause. Then the door opened a crack and Claire slipped out quickly, pressing it shut behind her. "I was just looking through Daniel's journals," she said quickly, her smile too tight. "Some things are hard to let go." Michael wanted to believe her, but he noticed the key shaking in her hand, the faint smell of burnt paper drifting from the study. The first real argument came not long after. They had been sitting at the dinner table when Michael, desperate to break the suffocating silence, asked, "Claire, do you ever think about moving? About starting fresh somewhere new?" Her fork froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes, wide and startled, darted to his. "No," she said sharply, almost too sharply. "This is our home." "Our home," Michael repeated softly, but the words felt false. This was Daniel's home. Every photo on the walls, every dent in the furniture, every faint echo in the halls, it all belonged to him. Michael was only a guest. Claire set her fork down and reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Please, Michael, don't ask me to leave. Not this house. Not yet." Her tone was desperate, almost fearful. And for the first time, Michael wondered if her attachment was more than grief. Weeks turned into months. Michael tried to bury his doubts, but they grew like weeds. Claire made late-night visits to Daniel's grave. He'd wake in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty, only to hear the front door creak moments later. When he asked where she'd gone, she always replied, "I just needed air." But her shoes were always muddy. One night, after a long day at work, Michael returned home to find the study door ajar. Claire was asleep upstairs. The temptation clawed at him. Slowly, quietly, he stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of smoke, like burned paper. On the desk sat a stack of letters bound with string. Michael's chest tightened as he picked them up. The handwriting was unmistakably Daniel's. The letters were dated only weeks before his death, each one addressed not to Claire, but to someone else. A name Michael didn't recognize. His heart pounded as he flipped through page after page. The words were cryptic, filled with urgency. Phrases like, "They can't know," and "If the truth comes out, everything falls apart." Then footsteps creaked behind him. "Michael?" He spun, nearly dropping the letters. Claire stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Michael stammered. I was just, don't," she snapped, her voice rising to a sharp edge. She crossed the room quickly, snatching the letters from his hands. "These aren't yours to read. They're private. Daniel's private." Her hands shook as she clutched them to her chest, her breathing ragged. Michael stepped forward, trying to steady his voice. "Claire, please. Who are those letters for? What was Daniel hiding? Her eyes filled with tears, but not of grief. They were tears of terror. "Don't ask me that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't ever ask me that again." She pushed past him, clutching the letters like a lifeline, leaving Michael standing alone in the study, his heart pounding, his mind spinning. That night, lying in bed, Michael stared at the ceiling, his body tense, his thoughts racing. The image of the letters burned in his mind. The cryptic words, the unfamiliar name, the fear in Claire's eyes. For the first time since Daniel's death, Michael felt a gnawing suspicion he couldn't ignore. Had Daniel been hiding something from him? From all of them? And if so, was Claire protecting his secret? Or was she protecting herself? The tension between them grew in the days that followed. Claire avoided his gaze, speaking only when necessary. She grew more distant, retreating deeper into silence. Michael tried to bridge the gap, but every attempt only seemed to push her further away. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael caught her slipping out the front door. Quietly, he followed. She walked quickly, her black coat pulled tightly around her, her steps purposeful. Through the streets, past the empty shops, down toward the cemetery. Michael's chest tightened as he watched from the shadows. Claire knelt at Daniel's grave, her lips moving, her hands shaking. He couldn't hear her words, but he could see the anguish on her face. Then, suddenly, she pulled something from her coat pocket. A photograph. Michael strained to see, but the distance was too great. She clutched it to her chest, sobbing silently, before burying it deep in the soil beside the headstone. Michael's breath caught. What was she hiding at Daniel's grave? When she returned home later that night, her face pale, her hands raw from the cold, Michael wanted to ask. He wanted to demand answers, but when she slipped into bed beside him, curling into his chest with trembling shoulders, he stayed silent. Because he was afraid of the answer. But silence is its own poison. And the more Michael held his questions inside, the more the tension strangled him. Finally, one evening, he broke. "Claire," he said softly, his voice trembling. "What are you hiding from me?" Her body went rigid. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes red, her lips quivering. "You don't want to know," she whispered. "Yes," he said firmly, his voice breaking. "I do." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Michael thought she might finally tell him. But instead, she shook her head violently, pressing her hands to her face. "You don't understand, Michael. If you knew the truth, everything would fall apart." The days after Claire's warning stretched on like an endless storm. Michael tried to focus on work, on routine, on anything but the words echoing in his mind. If you knew the truth, everything would fall apart. But silence gnawed at him, hollowing him out from the inside. He began noticing details he had once ignored. Locked drawers, phone calls she ended quickly when he entered the room. Nights when she stared out the window long after midnight, her face illuminated by pale moonlight, her eyes hollow. Every gesture, every glance, every word became suspect. And Michael found himself asking questions not just about Claire, but about Daniel. Had he ever truly known his best friend? One Saturday afternoon, Michael decided to do something he hadn't done since the funeral. He visited Daniel's old study again. The smell of wood polish and faded paper filled the air. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Dust motes danced in thin shafts of light through the curtains. Michael sat at the desk, running his hands over the smooth surface, remembering the nights he and Daniel had spent here, laughing over card games, sharing stories. But now the desk felt colder. He began to search. Not out of malice, but out of desperation. Drawers slid open to reveal nothing but pens and old receipts. Cabinets creaked, holding only faded files. And then, tucked beneath a stack of yellowed envelopes, he found it. At first glance, it was ordinary. Daniel stood smiling, his arm draped over a man's shoulder. But this man was unfamiliar. Sharp-jawed, dark-haired, with piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. Michael frowned. He didn't recognize him. And yet, there was something unsettling about the way Daniel's smile looked in that picture. Forced. Tight. As he turned the photo over, his heart skipped. On the back, written in Claire's delicate handwriting, were the words, "Don't forget what he did." Michael's chest tightened. He shoved the photo back into the envelope just as he heard footsteps on the stairs. Claire appeared in the doorway, her eyes locking onto the envelope in his hands. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp, edged with panic. Michael stood, fumbling for words. Claire, who is this man? Why was this hidden?" Her face paled. She rushed forward, snatching the photo from his hands. Her fingers trembled as she clutched it to her chest. "You shouldn't have seen this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Michael, you don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me," he said, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "Who was he? What did he do? What was Daniel hiding?" Claire's eyes filled with tears, but instead of answering, she shook her head violently. "You can't know. If you knew, it would destroy everything." And with that, she fled the room, leaving Michael standing in the silence, his mind spinning, his heart racing. That night, Michael barely slept. The image of the stranger haunted him. His sharp eyes, the cryptic note, "Don't forget what he did." By morning, suspicion had grown into obsession. When Claire left to run errands, Michael returned to the study. He scoured every drawer, every file, every corner. And at last, hidden beneath the false bottom of a cabinet, he found more photographs. Different scenes. Daniel with the same man, but always in places that felt wrong. A dingy motel room. A shadowy alley. One photo where Daniel looked frightened, his eyes darting away from the camera while the stranger smiled coldly. Michael's breath quickened. Each photograph carried the same phrase on the back, written in Claire's hand. "Don't forget what he did. Never forgive. Never trust." The words swirled in his mind. Never trust who? Daniel? Or the stranger? When Claire returned that evening, Michael confronted her again. "I found the photos," he said, his voice low, trembling. Her face drained of color. "Michael," she whispered, "you shouldn't have." "Tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice breaking. "I deserve to know what Daniel was hiding. What you're hiding. Who is this man?" Claire's body shook as tears streamed down her face. For a long moment, she said nothing, only staring at him as though weighing a decision that could shatter their world. Finally, she whispered, "He's the reason Daniel is dead." Michael froze. The words hung in the air like a noose. But before he could press her, Claire collapsed into sobs, refusing to say more. From that night onward, their home felt poisoned. Every silence was loaded, every word a knife. Michael tried to piece together the fragments. A stranger with Daniel in shadowy places. Notes of betrayal written by Claire. A whispered claim that the man was tied to Daniel's death. But none of it made sense. And Claire's refusal to explain only made the shadows grow darker. From that night onward, their home felt poisoned. Every silence was loaded, every word a knife. Michael tried to piece together the fragments. A stranger with Daniel in shadowy places. Notes of betrayal written by Claire. A whispered claim that the man was tied to Daniel's death. But none of it made sense. And Claire's refusal to explain only made the shadows grow darker. Evening, Michael returned home late from work to find Claire sitting in the living room, the photograph of Daniel clutched in her hands. Her eyes were swollen, her lips trembling. "Michael," she said softly, "do you ever wish you hadn't promised him?" His chest tightened. "Promised who?" "Michael," she whispered, "at his grave. I saw the way you looked at me that day. You made him a promise. But sometimes, promises are prisons." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" Her eyes, glassy and wet, finally met his. "If you keep digging, if you keep looking for answers, you'll wish you hadn't." She set the photo down and rose, leaving Michael alone with a chilling realization. His marriage was not built on love. It was built on secrets. The next morning, unable to resist the gnawing inside him, Michael made a decision. If Claire wouldn't tell him the truth, he would find it himself. So he went to Daniel's grave. The earth was freshly disturbed. Claire had been there again, kneeling, whispering, burying her secrets in the soil. Michael knelt too, running his hands over the damp dirt. And then his fingers brushed against something hard. He dug carefully until he unearthed a small tin box, rusted and cold. Opening it, he found letters. Pages yellowed with age, their ink blurred but still legible. The letters were Daniel's, and they were not love letters. They were confessions. Michael's heart pounded as he read. Words like betrayal, debt, threats, a deal gone wrong. And over, one name appeared. The same name he had seen on the letters before. The same name tied to the photographs. The same man whose face haunted Michael's every waking thought. As the rain began to fall once more, Michael realized the truth was closer than ever. But with every page he read, every word Daniel had left behind, one thing became horrifyingly clear. The man in the photographs wasn't just a stranger. He was the shadow Daniel had been running from. And now, that shadow had fallen over Michael too. The letters Michael unearthed from Daniel's grave felt heavier than stone in his hands. He read them over and over that night, alone in the dim glow of his desk lamp, the rain pressing against the windows like impatient fingers. Daniel's words were frantic, desperate. He wrote of debts unpaid, of being watched, of threats whispered in the dark. Again and again, a name appeared. Adrian Cole. The name clawed into Michael's mind like a hook. He whispered it aloud, testing the sound. Adrian Cole. Who was he? Why had Daniel feared him so much? And why had Claire written those words on the backs of the photographs? Don't forget what he did. Michael's obsession grew. He couldn't ask Claire directly. Not after the way she had shut down. After the way she'd warned him to stop digging. But the name was a key. And Michael was determined to turn it. The next morning, Michael made an excuse about an early meeting and left the house before dawn. His first stop was the town library, where dust and silence hung like a shroud. He searched public records, business registries, old newspapers, and there, buried in the archives, the name surfaced: Adrian Cole. Years ago, he had been a local contractor. Then his name appeared in police reports. Accusations of fraud, whispered ties to organized crime. Nothing proven, but shadows surrounded him. And then, a decade earlier, he vanished. No charges, no trial. Just gone. Michael leaned back in his chair, his pulse pounding. The man wasn't a ghost after all. He was real. And somehow he was tied to Daniel's death. That night, Michael returned home, his mind buzzing with what he had discovered. Claire sat in the living room reading, her eyes red-rimmed from tears she hadn't explained. "Long day?" she asked softly, her voice fragile. Michael nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just work?" But inside, his stomach churned with lies. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Days passed. Michael dug deeper, carefully, quietly. He found whispers in online forums, old threads mentioning Adrian Cole as though he were a monster told in ghost stories. People claimed he controlled debts, manipulated businesses, ruined lives. And more than once, Michael stumbled across Daniel's name tied to Adrian's. A debt. A failed investment. A partnership that had ended badly. Daniel had been entangled with Adrian Cole, and it had cost him everything. One night, Michael sat at his desk, letters spread before him, photographs laid out like puzzle pieces. He whispered to himself, "Daniel, what did you do?" And in that moment, he felt it. A presence. He looked up. Claire stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes sharp. "You're digging again," she said softly, accusingly. Michael swallowed hard. "Claire, I need answers. Who is Adrian Cole? Why did Daniel fear him?" Her lips trembled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a voice so faint it was almost a breath, she said, "Because Adrian owned him. And when Daniel tried to break free, Adrian made sure he never would." The words crashed over Michael like icy water. "Owned him? What do you mean?" Claire's eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "I told you not to ask. The truth will only destroy you." She turned to leave, but Michael stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Claire, if you loved him, if you loved me, don't you think I deserve to know?" Her body stiffened. She didn't look back. And then she whispered, "If you keep pushing, Adrian won't just haunt Daniel's memory. He'll come for us, too." That night, Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Claire's words echoing in his head. Adrian wasn't gone. He was out there, somewhere, watching. Michael's world became a blur of paranoia. Every shadow in the street seemed to follow him. Every car that slowed near his house felt like a threat. Even at work, he caught himself glancing over his shoulder, convinced eyes were on him. And then came the note, slipped under their front door one evening, folded neatly in half. No signature, no explanation. Just 4 words written in blocky, precise handwriting. "Stop digging." Or else... Michael's breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled as he held the note. He looked at Claire, who had turned pale as chalk, her lips quivering. "Claire," he whispered, "what do you know about this?" Her eyes welled with tears. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking her head. "He knows," she whispered. "He always knows." Michael's heart thundered. Adrian Cole wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was alive. and he was watching them. Over the following days, Michael felt the walls closing in. Every step echoed too loud. Every glance felt like surveillance. Claire became more withdrawn, more fragile. She jumped at every sound, every knock at the door. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Michael woke to find her sitting at the window, staring into the dark, her lips moving silently as though in prayer. Michael tried to reach her. "Claire, please. We can face this together. Just tell me the truth." But she only shook her head. "The truth isn't ours to tell. It belongs to Adrian." Michael's desperation turned into resolve. He could no longer sit by while shadows circled them. He began searching for Adrian in earnest. Old contacts, online records, anything. And slowly, a trail emerged. Rumors of a man living under false names, moving from town to town, always staying just out of reach. And then, one night, Michael found it. A grainy photograph on an obscure website. The face was older, harder, but unmistakable. Adrian Cole. And the caption beneath the photo chilled Michael to the bone. "Still collecting debts." Michael printed the photo, holding it in shaking hands. Adrian was alive. He was out there. And he hadn't let go of Daniel, not even in death. Michael looked at the letters, the photographs, the warnings Claire had written. Daniel had tried to escape Adrian, and it had killed him. Now Michael understood the truth. He wasn't just uncovering secrets. He was stepping into the same trap that had destroyed his best friend. Michael stared at the grainy photograph of Adrian Cole until his vision blurred. The caption, "Still collecting debts," seemed to crawl across the paper like a living threat. He folded the photo into his jacket pocket and paced the room, mind racing. Daniel's fear, Claire's tears, the cryptic warnings, they all pointed back to Adrian. But if Adrian was alive, if he was still collecting, then Michael realized something terrifying. The debt hadn't died with Daniel. It was still here. And now it was his. That night, Claire sensed the storm inside him. She reached for his arm, her voice trembling. "Michael, please. Stop this. If you keep searching, you'll bring him closer." That's what Adrian wants. Michael's eyes burned with anger and fear. "Closer? Claire, he's already here." He sent that note. "He's watching us." Claire flinched as though struck. Her lips parted, but no words came. And in her silence, Michael understood something. She wasn't just afraid for him. She was afraid because she already knew. The following days turned into a nightmare of paranoia. Michael noticed the same black sedan idling near his office. Once, he spotted a man leaning against a lamppost across from their home, smoking, never looking directly at the house, but never turning away either. The sense of being hunted tightened around him like a noose. And then it escalated. One morning, Michael found his car door slightly ajar. Inside, resting on the driver's seat, was a single playing card. The King of Spades. On the back, in the same blocky handwriting as the note, were 3 chilling words. "Debts are eternal." Michael gripped the card so tightly it bent in his hand. His breath came in shallow bursts. When he showed Claire, she collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face. "Michael," she sobbed, "he's marked you." "Marked me? What does that mean?" "It means," she whispered, "that Adrian has decided the debt is yours now." Michael felt the floor drop beneath him. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in Daniel's old study, staring at the letters, the photos, the card. He felt the walls pressing in, The air is suffocating. And then the phone rang. Not his cell. The old landline. The one that barely rang anymore. Michael picked it up slowly, dread pooling in his gut. At first, silence. And then a voice. Low. Calm. Cold. Michael, you've been busy. His grip tightened on the receiver. Who is this? A chuckle. Smooth. Unhurried. You already know. Michael's blood turned to ice. Adrian. The voice on the other end didn't deny it. You're in over your head, boy. Daniel thought he could cheat me. He thought friendship, family, promises could protect him. You saw where that got him. Michael's chest heaved. You killed him. Another laugh. I don't kill Michael. I collect. Daniel dug his grave with his own hands. I just made sure he laid in it. Michael's knees threatened to give out. What do you want from me? The line crackled, and then Adrian's voice sharpened into steel. Everything Daniel owed. And more. Starting with her, Michael's breath caught. Her? You married his widow. That makes her mine too. The line went dead. Michael stood frozen, the receiver dangling from his hand, his heart slamming in his chest. Claire. He rushed upstairs, flung open their bedroom door. Claire sat on the bed, startled by his sudden entrance. What is it? She asked, eyes wide with fear. Michael swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. He called me. Her face drained of color. Adrian. Michael nodded. He said you're part of the debt. Claire's body trembled violently. She pressed her fist to her temples, shaking her head. No, no, no. It's happening again. Michael grabbed her shoulders. Claire, tell me the truth. What did Daniel owe him? Why does he want you? Her sobs racked her body. Finally, through broken words, she confessed. Daniel wasn't just in debt. Adrian owned him. He owned his choices, his business, his life. And when Daniel couldn't pay, Adrian, he turned his eyes on me. Michael's stomach churned. On you? Claire nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel begged him to stop, begged him to leave me alone. Adrian agreed, on one condition. Daniel would keep working for him. Forever. But Daniel broke. He tried to escape. And Adrian never forgives. Her voice broke into a whisper. He killed him, Michael. Maybe not with his hands, but with everything else. Michael felt rage burn inside him. He couldn't let Adrian do the same to Claire. But rage wasn't enough. He needed a plan. The next days blurred into preparation. Michael contacted old friends, gathered what little information he could on Adrian's whereabouts. Claire pleaded with him to stop, but he couldn't. Every night he heard Adrian's voice in his head. Starting with her. Michael wouldn't let that happen. Then, one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Michael returned home to find the front door ajar. His heart lurched. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. Claire? He called, his voice cracking. No answer. He raced through the rooms, panic clawing at his chest. And then he found it. On the kitchen table. Another playing card. The Queen of Hearts, and beneath it, a note. She's with me now. Michael's scream tore through the empty house. Claire was gone. Adrian had taken her. Michael felt rage burn inside him. He couldn't let Adrian do the same to Claire. But rage wasn't enough. He needed a plan. The next days blurred into preparation. Michael contacted old friends, gathered what little information he could on Adrian's whereabouts. Claire pleaded with him to stop, but he couldn't. Every night he heard Adrian's voice in his head. Starting with her. Michael wouldn't let that happen. Then, one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Michael returned home to find the front door ajar. His heart lurched. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. "Claire?" he called, his voice cracking. No answer. He raced through the rooms, panic clawing at his chest. And then he found it. On the kitchen table. Another playing card. The Queen of Hearts, and beneath it, a note. "She's with me now." Michael's scream tore through the empty house. Claire was gone. Adrian had taken her. Michael's world shattered the moment he saw the Queen of Hearts. The note beneath it was a death sentence written in ink. "She's with me now." Adrian had Claire. For the first time in his life, Michael felt truly powerless. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the hollow terror of knowing that everything he loved could be stripped away at the flick of one man's hand. But in that hollow space, something else took root. A resolve that burned like fire. Michael didn't call the police. He couldn't. Adrian's reach was everywhere. The police had probably been paid, bent, or broken by him years ago. Instead, Michael retraced every thread he had pulled, every whispered name, every half-forgotten lead. It all pointed to the same place. An abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. A place Daniel had once mentioned in passing. A job site that never closed, even when the money dried up. It was no job site. It was Adrian's lair. Armed with nothing but Daniel's old revolver and a storm of desperation, Michael drove into the night. The city lights thinned until the only glow was his headlights cutting through the dark. And there, at the end of a gravel road, stood the warehouse. A hulking shadow against the bruised sky, its windows dead, its doors gaping like broken teeth. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the stench of oil and rust. The sound of dripping water echoed through the vast chamber. And then Michael heard it. A slow clap. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. Older now, but his presence filled the room with venom. His tailored suit looked out of place against the decay, but his smile fit perfectly. Adrian Cole. "You came," Adrian said, his voice low and mocking. "Daniel never had the courage to face me, but you... Oh, you're stubborn." Just like him, Michael's grip tightened on the revolver. "Where's Claire?" Adrian chuckled, shaking his head. "Always the hero. Always too late." He gestured to the far side of the room. There, bound to a chair, sat Claire. Her face bruised, her eyes swollen from crying, but alive. Michael surged forward, but Adrian raised a hand. "One more step and she won't be." Michael froze. His breath came hard, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Why?" he demanded. "Why her? Why me?" Adrian's smile twisted into something darker. "Because loyalty is a weakness. Daniel thought he could shield her, thought his friendship with you meant safety. But all it did was make her the sweetest leverage." He leaned closer, his eyes like shards of glass. "Daniel betrayed me. And now you wear his betrayal like a second skin. Debt doesn't die, Michael. It passes on. Michael's rage threatened to consume him. You destroyed him. You'll never touch her again." Adrian's laughter echoed off the walls. "You think you can stop me? You think a gun changes anything? I don't die. I multiply. Men like me don't vanish. We become the shadows people fear. Michael's hand trembled on the revolver. He could end it right there. A single shot, a clean break. But Adrian saw the hesitation. You don't have it in you. You're too much like Daniel. Weak. Afraid, Michael raised the gun, his voice hoarse. No, I'm nothing like him. The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. And then, a scream. Claire. She wrenched free from the chair, toppling it with her weight. Adrian spun, momentarily distracted. That was the opening Michael needed. The gun roared. The shot tore through the silence, echoing like thunder. Adrian staggered, shock flashing across his face. He pressed a hand to his chest, crimson blooming against the white of his shirt. But even as he fell, his smile remained. You'll never be free, he rasped. Not you. Not her. Then he crumpled, motionless. Michael dropped the gun, his whole body shaking. He rushed to Claire, cutting her bindings with trembling hands. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest. It's over, he whispered, though the words felt hollow. It's over now. But as he held her, his eyes drifted to Adrian's body. And in the silence that followed, Michael knew a terrible truth. Adrian was gone. But the scars he left behind would never heal. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Claire tried to return to some semblance of life. The newspapers never reported Adrian's death. There was no investigation, no questions asked. It was as though he had never existed. But Michael knew better. The shadow remained. Claire woke screaming some nights, her voice raw with fear. Michael found himself staring out of windows, convinced someone was watching. Every creak of the floorboards, every ring of the phone, every whisper of wind carried Adrian's ghost. They survived. But survival wasn't peace. Michael buried the revolver in the woods, deep where no one would ever find it. He thought it would bring closure, but all it did was remind him of the blood on his hands. One evening, as he and Claire sat in silence, she turned to him, her eyes hollow but steady. We'll never really escape him, will we? She asked. Michael didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sun dipped low and bled into darkness. Finally, he whispered, No, but we can survive him. Claire's hand found his, fragile, trembling but real. They sat together in the twilight, two broken souls bound not by love alone, but by scars that time would never erase. Michael and Claire were survivors, but in their survival, they carried the bitter reminder. The past always collects. Because some debts don't vanish with death. Some debts live on, carved into the lives of those left behind.